The piercing cry of the mine's warning bell shattered the crisp autumn air over Deadwood, South Dakota, in 1876, sending flocks of startled birds fleeing from the ponderosa pines that surrounded the Black Hills settlement. Clara Nicholson dropped her basket of fresh-picked wild berries, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched men rushing toward the Silver Strike mine entrance at the edge of town. "Cave in," someone shouted, the terrible word carrying across the valley. Clara gathered her skirts and ran, not toward town like the other women, but toward the mine. Her brother William worked those dangerous tunnels, and she wouldn't stand idle if there was even the slightest chance he was trapped inside. The 22-year-old had already lost too much to the harsh frontier life her parents to cholera 2 years prior, leaving her and William to make their own way in this unforgiving territory. "Miss Nicholson, you can't go up there." Sheriff Hawkins called out as she rushed past the assayer's office. "My brother's in there," she shouted over her shoulder, not slowing her pace. By the time Clara reached the mine entrance, a crowd had formed. Miners with soot-blackened faces emerged coughing and stumbling from the darkness, while others rushed in with support beams and tools. The foreman, Mr. Blackwell, stood directing rescue efforts, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. "William Nicholson." Clara grabbed the foreman's sleeve. "Is he out?" Blackwell's face darkened. "We're still counting heads, Miss Nicholson. Best you wait in town with the other women." "I'm staying," she insisted, her blue eyes flashing with determination. "Tell me how I can help." For 3 agonizing hours, Clara assisted with the rescue efforts, carrying water to exhausted men, helping tend to the injured, and anxiously watching each face that emerged from the mine shaft. As the afternoon wore on, the grim reality settled over the gathered crowd. 5 men remained unaccounted for, including her brother. "We've cleared most of the main shaft," Blackwell announced, wiping sweat from his brow. But the east tunnel collapsed completely. No one could have survived that section. Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Which section was William working? The foreman couldn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Miss Nicholson." "No," she shook her head, refusing to accept his silent confirmation. "No, I don't believe it. I'm going in." "That's impossible," Blackwell said firmly. "It's too dangerous, and we need experienced men for the recovery operation." Clara stood her ground. "I grew up following my father through mining camps from Colorado to Montana. I know more about tunnel structures than half your crew." It wasn't entirely true, but she knew enough, and desperation made her bold. "I'm small enough to fit through spaces your men can't. Let me help." Something in her unwavering gaze must have convinced him. With great reluctance, Blackwell allowed Clara to join a recovery team, but only after the engineers declared a section stable enough for careful exploration. Dressed in borrowed mining clothes, a lantern clutched in her trembling hand, Clara followed 3 experienced miners into the bowels of the earth. The air grew thick with dust and the sweet sour smell of disturbed rock. Timber supports groaned ominously overhead. "This is as far as we go together, miss," said Hank, the lead miner. "That crevice ahead is the only way into the east chamber, and it's barely wide enough for a child." Clara peered into the narrow opening. Beyond it lay the section where William had been working and where she might find her brother's body. "I'll continue alone." "It ain't safe," Hank warned. "If you hear anything shifting, anything at all, you get yourself back here quick as lightning. We'll wait 30 minutes, not a minute more." Clara nodded, removed her tool belt to make herself slimmer, and squeezed through the crevice. The passage forced her to crawl on her belly, pushing the lantern ahead of her, inch by excruciating inch. Rocks scraped her back and shoulders, dust filling her lungs until each breath became a struggle. Just as claustrophobia threatened to overwhelm her, the passage widened, and she emerged into a partially collapsed chamber. "William," she called, her voice swallowed by the dead air. "William, can you hear me?" Only silence answered. Clara raised her lantern higher, its light revealing a scene of devastation. The timber supports had given way, bringing down tons of rock and earth. No one could have survived such destruction. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to give up, methodically working her way through the chamber, calling her brother's name. She had nearly reached the far wall when she noticed a boot protruding from beneath a pile of smaller rocks. Her heart lurched painfully in her chest. "William," she whispered, kneeling beside the rubble. But as she began clearing away the debris, she realized the boot didn't belong to her brother. It was a different style, altogether expensive, with ornate stitching. Clara worked faster, her hands bleeding as she clawed away rock and dirt until she uncovered not her brother but a stranger. He was a large man, powerfully built, with a dust-covered face and blood matting his dark hair. He wore no miner's clothes, but rather the garb of a cowboy denim pants, a leather vest over a once white shirt, and a bandana around his neck. What such a man was doing in the depths of a silver mine, Clara couldn't imagine, but one thing was certain: he wasn't among the miners Blackwell had accounted for. Clara pressed her fingers to the man's neck, expecting to find no pulse. To her astonishment, she felt a faint, steady beat. "He was alive. Hello, can you hear me?" she asked, gently brushing dust from his face. The stranger remained unresponsive, but his chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Clara glanced back toward the crevice through which she'd entered. She couldn't possibly drag this man through that narrow passage, and her 30 minutes were surely almost up. She made a quick decision. Leaving her lantern beside the unconscious cowboy, Clara scrambled back through the crevice. "I found someone," she called to the waiting miners. "He's alive, but I can't move him alone, and he won't fit through here," Hank frowned. "Who'd you find? All our boys are accounted for, dead or alive." "It's not a miner," Clara explained. "It's a cowboy by the looks of his clothes." The miners exchanged confused glances. "Only one other entrance to that chamber," Hank said finally. "Through the old vertical shaft on the east side. It was supposed to be sealed off last month." "Well, he's there and he's alive," Clara insisted. "We need to widen this opening or find another way to reach him." For the next hour, Clara watched anxiously as the miners carefully widened the crevice, removing rocks one by one to avoid triggering another collapse. When the opening was finally large enough, Hank and another miner squeezed through with a stretcher, returning 20 minutes later with the unconscious cowboy. "He's in bad shape," Hank reported as they carried the stranger out of the mine. "But he's tough. Survived when he shouldn't have." Outside, the afternoon had given way to evening. Most of the crowd had dispersed, families of the confirmed dead taking their loved ones home for burial, others returning to their interrupted lives. Clara followed the stretcher to the doctor's office, her search for William temporarily forgotten in the face of this unexpected rescue. Dr. Merriweather met them at the door of his clinic. "Another survivor. Put him in the back room. The others are stable for now." "It's not one of ours, Doc," Hank explained. "Miss Nicholson found him in the east chamber. No idea what he was doing there." The doctor's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise, but he quickly turned his attention to his patient. "Concussion, broken ribs, possibly internal injuries," he muttered, examining the cowboy. "Miss Nicholson, if you're staying, make yourself useful. Clean those cuts while I check his head wound." Clara nodded, grateful for something to do. As she gently washed the dust and blood from the stranger's face, his features emerged: strong jawline, straight nose, and dark eyebrows that contrasted with the tan of a man who spent his life outdoors. Despite the circumstances, she couldn't help noticing he was handsome in a rugged way, perhaps 30 years old, with calloused hands that spoke of hard work. "Do you recognize him?" Dr. Merriweather asked, stitching a deep gash on the cowboy's temple. Clara shook her head. "Never seen him before." She hesitated. "Doctor, my brother William was in the East Tunnel. They haven't found him." The doctor's hands stilled momentarily. "I'm sorry, Clara. They brought in the last of the bodies an hour ago. Your brother was among them." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Clara gripped the edge of the examination table to steady herself. William, her cheerful, ambitious brother who'd promised they would build a real home once he struck silver, was gone. She was truly alone now. "I'd like to see him," she said quietly. "Tomorrow," Dr. Merriweather said gently. "He's been taken to the undertaker's. You can make arrangements in the morning." He nodded toward the unconscious cowboy. "For now, this fellow needs attention, and I could use your help through the night. Would you stay? The other nurse has her hands full with the injured miners." Clara nodded numbly. There was nothing to return to except an empty cabin and unbearable grief. At least here she could be useful. Throughout the night, Clara tended to the mysterious cowboy, bathing his fevered skin, helping the doctor set his broken ribs, and watching anxiously whenever his breathing faltered. Near dawn, as she was replacing the cool cloth on his forehead, his eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of a summer storm. For a moment, he stared at her in confusion. Then panic set in. He tried to sit up, gasping in pain as his injuries protested the sudden movement. "Easy," Clara soothed, gently pressing him back against the pillows. "You're safe. You were caught in a mine collapse, but you're at the doctor's office in Deadwood now." "Deadwood," he repeated, his voice a harsh rasp. "How long?" "Just one night," Clara assured him. "Do you remember what happened? What were you doing in that mine?" His brow furrowed in concentration, then he winced. "Can't remember. Everything's foggy." His eyes focused on her face. "You found me," Clara nodded. "I was looking for my brother. I found you instead. Your brother." "He didn't make it," Clara said, the words catching in her throat. The cowboy's hand found hers, his grip surprisingly strong for someone so injured. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Dr. Merriweather entered before Clara could respond. "Ah, you're awake. Good sign." He checked the cowboy's pupils and pulse. "What's your name, son?" The man blinked slowly. Thomas Sinclair." "Well, Mr. Sinclair, you're lucky to be alive. A few more hours under that rubble and we'd be having a very different conversation." The doctor helped him sip some water. "Any idea what you were doing in a silver mine? You're not dressed for mining work." Thomas frowned, then shook his head carefully. "Can't remember, just fragments, running, darkness." He looked genuinely troubled by his inability to recall. "Memory loss isn't uncommon with head injuries, doctor." Merriweather explained. "It may return in time or it may not. For now, you need rest." He turned to Clara. "Miss Nicholson, you should get some rest too. You've been up all night." Clara nodded, suddenly aware of her bone-deep exhaustion. "I'll return this afternoon," she promised, gathering her shawl. As she reached the door, Thomas called out, "Miss Nicholson." When she turned back, he said simply, "Thank you for digging me out." The next week passed in a blur of grief and unwelcome responsibilities for Clara. She buried her brother in the growing cemetery on the hill above Deadwood, standing alone as the preacher spoke words that brought no comfort. She sold their modest cabin and most of their possessions, keeping only what would fit in 2 trunks. Without William's income from the mine, she couldn't maintain even their simple lifestyle. The boarding house had a single room available, a cramped space under the eaves with just enough room for a narrow bed and her smaller trunk. Mrs. Hollister, the stern proprietress, made it clear that Clara needed to find employment quickly if she wanted to keep her lodgings. "Decent jobs for single women are scarce in mining towns," Mrs. Hollister warned. "But Widow Parker at the Mercantile might need help, and there's always work at the laundry." Clara nodded, determined to make her own way. She had nearly reached the bottom of her modest savings, but pride kept her from revealing her dire circumstances. Each afternoon, between her job-seeking efforts, she visited Thomas Sinclair at the doctor's office, partly out of concern for the man she'd rescued and partly because his company offered a brief respite from her grief. Thomas was recovering slowly but steadily. His memory remained fragmented. He knew his name, and that he'd been a cowboy working cattle drives across the Dakota Territory, but he couldn't recall what had brought him to Deadwood or why he'd been in the mine. Despite this frustration, he maintained a quiet dignity that Clara found oddly comforting. "The doctor says I can leave his care tomorrow," Thomas told her on the 7th day, sitting up in bed and looking considerably stronger than when she'd first found him. "Though where I'll go, I'm not entirely sure. My horse is missing, along with my gear and most of my money. Deadwood has 2 hotels and several boarding houses," Clara suggested, arranging the wildflowers she'd brought in a tin cup beside his bed. "Mrs. Hollister might have another room available where I'm staying." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "I'll need work soon. Can't pay for lodging on good intentions." He flexed his hand, wincing slightly. "Once these ribs heal a bit more, I can handle horses again. Maybe the livery stable needs help." Clara was about to respond when Sheriff Hawkins appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Mr. Sinclair, I've got some questions for you." Thomas straightened. "Sheriff, what can I help you with?" Hawkins entered the room, nodding briefly to Clara. "Miss Nicholson." Mind giving us a few minutes? Actually, I'd like her to stay, Thomas said, surprising both Clara and the sheriff. She saved my life, I trust her judgment, the sheriff shrugged. Suit yourself. He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. This wanted poster came in from Cheyenne yesterday. Man matching your description is wanted for questioning about a stage robbery near Fort Laramie. 3 people died, Clara gasped, looking from the poster to Thomas's face. The drawing did bear a passing resemblance to him, though the man pictured had a fuller beard and harder eyes. Thomas took the poster, studying it carefully. This isn't me, Sheriff. I've never robbed anyone, and I've certainly never killed. His voice remained steady, but Clara noticed his knuckles whitening as he gripped the paper. Maybe, maybe not, Hawkins said. Convenient that you claim not to remember what you were doing before the mine collapse. Even more convenient that you were found in a mine shaft that's been out of use for months, a good hiding place for a man on the run. Sheriff, Clara interjected, Mr. Sinclair was severely injured. He nearly died. I'm not arresting him, Miss Nicholson, Hawkins said, though his hand rested meaningfully on his gun belt. Just asking questions, like why a cowboy with no business in a silver mine was found in a sealed-off section during a collapse. Thomas handed the poster back. I wish I could tell you, Sheriff, I truly do, but I don't remember. Hawkins studied him for a long moment. I'm sending a telegram to Cheyenne for more information. Until I hear back, I'd appreciate it if you'd stay in Deadwood. Don't make me come looking for you. After the sheriff left, a heavy silence filled the room. Clara searched Thomas's face, looking for any sign of deception, but found only troubled confusion in his gray eyes. You don't believe him, do you? Thomas asked quietly. Clara considered her answer carefully. I believe a man who risks his life to save others isn't the type to rob stage coaches and leave innocent people to die. Thomas's expression softened. What makes you think I'd risk my life for others? Because that's what you were doing in the mine, Clara said with sudden certainty. You weren't hiding, you were looking for someone. His eyes widened slightly. How could you possibly know that? It's the only explanation that makes sense. The east tunnel had been closed for weeks. The only reason anyone would go in was if they believed someone needed help. She leaned forward. When they rang the warning bell for the cave-in, did you go into the mine to help? Thomas closed his eyes, his brow furrowing in concentration. For several long moments, he remained silent, then suddenly inhaled sharply. There was a boy, he said slowly, opening his eyes. A boy about 12 or 13. I saw him slip into the mine just before the collapse. No one else noticed him. I followed. Tried to get him out. Clara's heart raced. A boy, are you certain? Yes, I remember now. Small, dark-haired, carrying something. A lunch pail, I think. He went in through the old entrance. Clara pressed a hand to her mouth. Tommy Jenkins, she whispered. William mentioned him the son of one of the miners. He often brought his father lunch. Her eyes filled with tears. They found them together. Mr. Jenkins had shielded the boy with his own body, but neither survived. Thomas reached for her hand, his touch gentle despite his calloused palm. I'm sorry, I couldn't reach them in time. You tried, Clara said, squeezing his hand. That's what matters. And it explains why you were there not hiding, but trying to save a child. She stood abruptly. We need to tell the sheriff. This proves you're not the man from that wanted poster. But Thomas shook his head. It proves nothing except that I remember a bit more than I did before. It's my word against a piece of paper, and right now, that paper carries more weight. Over the next few days, Clara divided her time between her new job at the Mercantile and helping Thomas settle into a small room at the same boarding house where she lived. Mrs. Hollister had been reluctant to rent to a man with no references and a potential connection to a wanted criminal, but Clara vouched for him, and the widow's practical nature couldn't ignore the additional income. Thomas's physical recovery continued steadily. Though still weak from his injuries, he managed to secure work at the livery stable, where his evident skill with horses overcame the owner's initial hesitation. Each evening, he and Clara would share a simple meal in the boarding house dining room, their unlikely friendship deepening through quiet conversations. Any more memories returned today? Clara asked one evening as they walked slowly along the town's main street, the October air growing crisper as night fell. Fragments, Thomas admitted. I remember riding into Deadwood about a week before the collapse. I was looking for someone, but I can't recall who or why. He adjusted the sling supporting his injured arm. Dr. Merriweather says it might all come back at once or in pieces over time or never, Clara finished softly. Thomas nodded, his expression troubled. What if I am the man from that poster, Clara? What if I've done terrible things I can't remember? Clara stopped walking, turning to face him. Do you truly believe that's possible? In your heart, do you feel capable of such violence? He considered her question seriously. No, he said finally. Whatever I was before, whatever I might have done, I know I couldn't have killed innocent people. Then that's what matters, Clara said firmly. The past is the past. It's what you do now that defines you. Thomas studied her face in the fading light. How did you become so wise for someone so young? I'm not that young, Clara protested with a small smile. And wisdom comes quickly on the frontier. You either learn fast or you don't survive. Her expression sobered. Losing my parents taught me that tomorrow isn't guaranteed. Losing William taught me that grief doesn't kill you, even when you wish it would. Thomas reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Clara Nicholson. Something in his eyes made her heart quicken, but before she could respond, Sheriff Hawkins's voice called out from behind them. Sinclair, got news from Cheyenne. They turned to see the sheriff approaching, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. Clara unconsciously moved closer to Thomas, her hand finding his. Sheriff, Thomas acknowledged cautiously. Good news, I hope. That depends, Hawkins said, stopping before them. The man on that poster, his name is James Harden. He was captured 2 days ago near Laramie. Relief flooded through Clara. Then you know Thomas isn't the man you're looking for, Hawkins nodded reluctantly. Seems not. Still doesn't explain what he was doing in that mine, but it's not my concern anymore. He tipped his hat. Miss Nicholson, Mr. Sinclair. As the sheriff walked away, Clara turned to Thomas with a bright smile. You're free of suspicion, isn't that wonderful? But Thomas didn't share her enthusiasm. He was staring after the sheriff, his face pale in the deepening twilight. Harden, he whispered. James Harden. Clara's smile faded. Thomas, what is it? Do you know that name? He's the reason I came to Deadwood, Thomas said, his voice distant. James Harden killed my brother. The following day, Thomas's memories began returning in earnest, triggered by hearing Harden's name. As he and Clara sat in the small parlor of the boarding house after dinner, he recounted what he now remembered. My brother Patrick and I ran a small cattle operation near the Cheyenne River, he explained, his gray eyes focused on some distant point. Nothing fancy, just enough to make a decent living. Patrick was the businessman. He'd ride into Cheyenne or Deadwood to sell our cattle while I managed things at the ranch. Clara listened intently, her mending forgotten in her lap. 3 months ago, Patrick was returning from Deadwood with the money from a sale. He never made it home. Thomas's jaw tightened. They found his body 2 days later. He'd been robbed and shot in the back. I'm so sorry, Clara said softly, understanding too well the pain of losing a sibling. Thomas nodded in acknowledgement. The territorial marshal investigated but found nothing. Then, about a month ago, I heard rumors of a man in Deadwood spending freely, bragging about a lucky find on the trail. The description matched a stranger Patrick had mentioned in his last letter, a man named Harden who'd been asking too many questions about cattle sales and travel routes. So you came to find him, Clara surmised. For justice or revenge, I'm not sure anymore, Thomas admitted. At the time, all I knew was that I needed to look this man in the eye and learn the truth about my brother's death. He ran a hand through his dark hair. I arrived in Deadwood and started asking questions. Discovered Harden had taken work at the Silver Strike mine while laying low. I was watching the mine entrance that morning, planning to confront him when his shift ended. And then you saw the boy go in and the mine collapsed, Clara finished. Instead of pursuing revenge, you tried to save a child. Thomas met her gaze. I never thought about it that way. A rueful smile crossed his face. Nearly got myself killed instead of finding justice for Patrick. Perhaps you found something more important, Clara suggested. The man who went into that mine seeking vengeance isn't the same man who came out of it. Thomas reached across the small table between them, taking her hand. No, he isn't, and that's largely because of you, Clara. Before she could respond, Mrs. Hollister entered the parlor carrying a telegram. This just arrived for you, Mr. Sinclair. Boy said it was urgent. Thomas thanked her and opened the yellow paper. As he read, his expression darkened. It's from the marshal in Cheyenne, he said to Clara. Hardin confessed to several robberies, including the one that killed my brother. They're hanging him next week. His voice remained steady, but Clara could see the storm of emotions in his eyes. They're asking if I want to witness the execution. Will you go? Clara asked quietly. Thomas carefully folded the telegram. I've been thinking about Patrick every day for months, wondering who killed him and why. I thought finding his murderer would bring me peace. He looked up at Clara. But now that it's happened, all I feel is empty. Watching Hardin hang won't bring Patrick back. What will you do now? Clara asked, suddenly fearful of his answer. In the few weeks since she'd pulled him from the collapsed mine, Thomas had become important to her in ways she hadn't expected. The thought of him leaving Deadwood created an ache in her chest. I still have the ranch, he said slowly. It's good land with a solid house Patrick and I built together, but it's a long ride from here. He hesitated, then added, it would be a lonely place for just one person. Clara's heart quickened at his implication. I imagine it would be. Clara, Thomas said, his voice lowering to ensure their conversation remained private despite Mrs. Hollister puttering nearby. I know we haven't known each other long, but these weeks have meant more to me than I can say. You saved my life, not just by digging me out of that mine, but by showing me there's more to living than seeking revenge. Clara set aside her mending, giving him her full attention. You've given me something too, Thomas. After William died, I thought I had no one left in the world. But then there you were, needing me, making me feel like I mattered again. Thomas's eyes softened. You matter more than you know. He took a deep breath. I have to return to the ranch eventually. There are cattle to tend, decisions to make, but I don't want to go without. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. Without what? Clara prompted gently. Without knowing if you might consider coming with me. The words came out in a rush. Not right away, we hardly know each other properly, but perhaps you could visit, see the place, and if you liked it. He trailed off, looking suddenly uncertain. Clara felt a smile blooming across her face. Are you asking to court me, Thomas Sinclair? Trying to, rather awkwardly, he admitted with a self-deprecating laugh. I'm better with horses than words. I think you're doing fine, Clara assured him, her cheeks warming. And yes, I would like that very much. Over the next month, as autumn gave way to the first hints of winter in the Black Hills, Thomas and Clara's courtship progressed with a slow, steady certainty. Thomas regained his strength, working full days at the livery stable while making plans to return to his ranch after the new year. Clara continued at the mercantile, saving every penny she could and learning as much as possible about ranch life from Thomas's stories. Each Sunday, they would walk together through the pine-covered hills surrounding Deadwood, their conversations ranging from childhood memories to dreams of the future. Clara shared stories of her parents and William, finding that speaking of them eased rather than sharpened her grief. Thomas described the ranch in vivid detail, the sprawling pastures, the creek that ran clear all year round, the way the sunset turned the distant mountains purple each evening. It sounds like paradise, Clara said one crisp Sunday in November as they sat on a fallen log overlooking the town. Though I'm sure it's also a great deal of work. More than I can manage alone, Thomas acknowledged. I'll need to hire help when I return. Patrick always handled that side of things. Clara hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. How long do you intend to stay in Deadwood? Before returning to your ranch, I mean. Thomas turned to face her, his expression serious. That depends partly on you, Clara, on me. I won't pretend the ranch isn't isolated. The nearest neighbors are 5 miles away and town is a full day's ride. It would be a significant change from life here. He took her gloved hands in his. I don't want to rush you, but I also need to return soon. Winter makes travel difficult and the cattle need tending. Clara understood his dilemma. You're wondering if I'm ready to make a decision about accompanying you. I'm wondering if I've earned the right to ask something so significant of you, Thomas corrected gently. We've known each other such a short time. Clara looked out over Deadwood, the town that had been her home for the past 2 years. She had few ties here now. Her job was pleasant enough but not fulfilling, and with William gone, no family remained to anchor her. The thought of staying after Thomas left filled her with a loneliness she could scarcely bear. "Sometimes," she said slowly, "a short time can be enough to know what matters. When I found you in that mine, I was looking for my brother, hoping against hope that he had survived. I found you instead." She turned back to Thomas. "Perhaps that wasn't chance, but providence." Thomas's eyes warmed. "Are you saying you'd consider coming with me when I leave?" "I'm saying more than that," Clara replied, her heart racing with the certainty of her decision. "I'm saying that I love you, Thomas Sinclair. I've never known anyone like you, and I don't want to lose you just when I've found you." For a moment, Thomas seemed stunned by her declaration. Then his face transformed with a joy that took Clara's breath away. "Clara Nicholson," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "I've been falling in love with you since I opened my eyes and saw you beside my sick. I didn't dare hope you might feel the same way." He slid from the log to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "I don't have a ring yet, and I know this is sudden, but I can't imagine my life without you in it. Will you marry me? Come to the ranch as my wife, not just my guest." Clara laughed through sudden tears. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will." Their wedding took place 2 weeks later in Deadwood's small church. The ceremony was modest, with only a handful of guests, Clara's friends from the mercantile, Thomas's employers from the livery stable, and a few boarders from Mrs. Hollister's house. Clara wore her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes, with a crown of evergreen and dried berries in her auburn hair. Thomas had purchased a new shirt and vest for the occasion, his tall frame cutting an impressive figure as he waited for her at the altar. As Clara walked down the aisle alone, she felt not sadness at the absence of family, but gratitude for the new beginning before her. When she reached Thomas and placed her hand in his, the warmth of his smile chased away any last doubts. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, and Clara felt the future opening before her like a book waiting to be written. After the ceremony, a small reception was held at the boarding house, with Mrs. Hollister providing a wedding cake as her gift to the couple. As the afternoon waned, Clara and Thomas thanked their guests and retired to the room they would share for their remaining time in Deadwood. Thomas's slightly larger quarters at the end of the hall. "Mrs. Sinclair," Thomas said as he closed the door behind them. "How does that sound?" "Wonderful," Clara replied, removing her flower crown and placing it carefully on the dresser. "Though I'm still getting used to it." Thomas crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Are you happy, Clara?" Truly, she looked up at him, at this man who had come into her life so unexpectedly. "Happier than I thought possible after losing William. It feels almost wrong to find such joy so soon after such grief." "Your brother would want you to be happy," Thomas said gently, "just as Patrick would want me to live fully, not spend my life seeking vengeance." He touched her cheek. "They brought us together in a way, don't you think? My search for Patrick's killer led me to that mine, and your search for William led you to me." Clara leaned into his touch, a strange sort of blessing from a terrible tragedy. "Life on the frontier is full of such contradictions," Thomas observed. "Beauty alongside danger, abundance with scarcity, profound joy after devastating loss." He drew her closer. "But I promise you this, Clara Sinclair, whatever comes, we'll face it together." 2 weeks after their wedding, Clara and Thomas prepared to leave Deadwood for the ranch. Thomas had purchased a sturdy wagon and 2 horses with his savings, loading it with supplies for the journey and the winter ahead. Clara had resigned from the mercantile, receiving a set of thick woolen blankets as a parting gift from the kind-hearted widow Parker. The morning of their departure dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue above the snow-dusted pines. Clara stood outside the boarding house, saying goodbye to Mrs. Hollister while Thomas secured the last of their trunks in the wagon. "You take care out there, girl," the older woman said gruffly, pressing a package of food for the journey into Clara's hands. "That ranch is mighty isolated from what your husband says." "We'll be fine," Clara assured her. "Thomas knows the land, and I'm stronger than I look." Mrs. Hollister nodded approvingly. "That you are, finding that man in the mine when everyone else had given up searching, that took grit." She glanced at Thomas. He's a good man, doesn't talk much, but his eyes speak plain enough when he looks at you. Clara smiled. Thank you for everything, Mrs. Hollister, for taking us in, for the wedding cake, all of it. Go on now, the widow said, waving away Clara's gratitude. Got a long journey ahead, and daylight's precious this time of year. With final goodbyes completed, Clara climbed onto the wagon seat beside Thomas. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, tucking a blanket over their laps against the morning chill. Ready, Mrs. Sinclair? He asked, eyes crinkling with the smile that still made her heart flutter. Clara took one last look at Deadwood, the town where she had known both her deepest sorrow and most unexpected joy. Ready, Mr. Sinclair, she replied, and with a flick of the reins, they began their journey home. The 5-day trip to the ranch tested Clara's endurance, but also cemented her certainty that she had made the right choice. They traveled through breathtaking country rolling prairies that stretched to the horizon, sheltered valleys where deer bounded away at their approach, and rocky outcroppings that glowed red in the sunset. At night, they camped beneath stars so numerous they seemed to press down from the velvet sky, Thomas teaching Clara to identify constellations as they huddled together for warmth. On the afternoon of the 5th day, Thomas pointed to a distant line of trees. There, he said, a note of pride in his voice. That's the northern boundary of our land. The ranch house is about 2 miles beyond those cottonwoods. Clara leaned forward eagerly. Our land, she repeated, savoring the words. After months of uncertainty following William's death, the idea of having a home again, a true home, filled her with quiet joy. As they crossed the creek that marked the property line, Thomas grew quiet, his expression solemn. Patrick and I built everything here from nothing, he said finally. Came out with just a wagon of supplies, not much different from what we're carrying now. Slept under the stars for months while we constructed the house. Clara touched his arm. I wish I could have known him. He would have liked you, Thomas said with certainty. Always said I needed someone sensible to balance my impulsive nature. Clara laughed. You, impulsive, the man who spent 20 minutes this morning determining the optimal way to pack the cooking pots, Thomas grinned. I wasn't always so methodical. Nearly got myself killed more than once in my younger days. Patrick was the careful one. His smile faded slightly. Being responsible for everything, the ranch, the cattle, making a living, it changes a person. As does pulling a man from a collapsed mine and marrying him 6 weeks later, Clara pointed out. We're both changed by what we've experienced, but that's not a bad thing, is it? Before Thomas could respond, they crested a small rise, and the ranch house came into view. Clara gasped in appreciation. The house was larger than she had expected, a solid 2-story structure built of squared logs with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. A barn stood nearby, along with several smaller outbuildings. The setting was magnificent, with the house nestled in a natural clearing surrounded by cottonwoods and aspens, their bare winter branches stark against the blue sky. Thomas, it's beautiful, Clara breathed. It needs work, he warned. Been empty for months now. The neighbor, Mr. Jensen, has been checking on things and tending the cattle as best he can, but, he shrugged, it won't be comfortable at first. Clara squeezed his hand. It's more than I dared hope for, and we'll make it comfortable together. As the wagon approached, the front door of the house opened, and an older man stepped onto the porch, raising a hand in greeting. That's Eric Jensen, Thomas explained. Good man, his ranch borders ours to the east. Mr. Jensen welcomed them warmly, helping Thomas unload the wagon while explaining what he'd managed to do in Thomas's absence. Cattle are mostly accounted for, though you lost a few to wolves back in October, he reported. Got the house closed up tight before the first frost, but it'll be mighty cold inside till you get a fire going. We appreciate everything you've done, Mr. Jensen, Clara said sincerely. I know it was a burden on top of your own ranch work. Neighborly duty, madam, Jensen replied with a nod. Besides, Patrick and Thomas helped me rebuild after that tornado took my barn 3 years back, just returning the favor. He turned to Thomas. You planning to run the place alone or hiring hands? Alone for now, till we get settled, Thomas answered. Might take on help come spring when the calving starts. Jensen nodded thoughtfully. Well, my boy Daniel could use the work if you're looking. Turned 16 last month, strong as an ox and knows cattle. He glanced at the darkening sky. Should head back before I lose the light. The missus sent along some provisions, left them in the pantry. Should tide you over till you can make a proper shopping trip. After the neighbor departed, Clara and Thomas entered their home together for the first time. The house was indeed cold, with a musty smell from being closed up for months, but Clara saw immediately that it had been built with care and skill. Wide plank floors, a stone fireplace large enough to warm the main room, and surprisingly large windows that would fill the space with light during the day. "Let me show you around properly later," Thomas said, hurrying to build a fire. "First priority is getting this place warm." Within an hour, the fireplace was crackling merrily, and Thomas had lit lamps throughout the main floor. Clara explored while he worked, discovering a well-appointed kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a formal dining room they would rarely use, and a cozy study lined with bookshelves. Upstairs, she found 3 bedrooms, including the master chamber with its hand-carved bed frame and quilt-covered mattress. By nightfall, they had carried in the essentials from the wagon, warmed the house to a tolerable temperature, and prepared a simple meal from the provisions left by Mrs. Jensen. Sitting before the fire afterward, Clara leaned against Thomas's shoulder, watching the flames dance. "Happy?" he asked, his arm secure around her waist. "Very," she assured him. "It feels right being here with you, like this is where I was meant to end up all along." Thomas pressed a kiss to her temple. "When I rode into Deadwood searching for Hardin, I never imagined I'd return with a wife." His voice grew serious. "I'm still amazed you agreed to come. This life won't be easy, Clara. The work is hard, the winter's harsh, and town is far away." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Clara reminded him. "And after losing my family, I've learned that comfort and convenience mean little compared to being with someone you love." She turned in his arms to face him. "Besides, I've already survived the worst days of my life. Everything from now on is a gift." The winter months passed in a rhythm of work and togetherness as Clara and Thomas settled into married life. The ranch demanded constant attention, cattle to check even in the coldest weather, repairs to buildings damaged by winter storms, wood to chop for the ever-hungry fireplaces. Clara took over management of the household, learning to cook on the temperamental wood stove and adapting her limited domestic skills to the challenges of frontier life. Their nearest neighbors, the Jensens, proved to be invaluable friends, visiting when weather permitted and sharing their knowledge of the region. Mrs. Jensen particularly took Clara under her wing, teaching her to preserve food, make soap, and treat common ailments with herbal remedies. Clara soaked up the knowledge eagerly, determined to be a true partner to Thomas in their shared enterprise. As winter gave way to spring, the ranch burst into new life. Calves were born, requiring round-the-clock monitoring during the difficult births. Thomas hired young Daniel Jensen as promised, and the boys' cheerful energy and willing hands lightened their workload considerably. Clara planted a vegetable garden beside the house, envisioning fresh produce to supplement their largely meat-based diet. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant hills, Thomas noticed Clara seemed unusually quiet. "Something troubling you?" he asked, covering her hand with his. Clara shook her head. "Not troubled. Just thinking about how much has changed in 6 months. Half a year ago, I was pulling you out of that collapsed mine, not knowing if you'd live or die. Best thing that ever happened to me, that cave-in," Thomas said with a wry smile. "Though I could have done without the broken ribs and head injury." "Do you ever regret not seeing Hardin hang?" Clara asked, the question that had been on her mind for months finally finding voice. Finding justice for Patrick, Thomas considered this seriously. "No," he said finally. "Whatever happened to Hardin, it wouldn't bring Patrick back, and if I'd never gone into that mine looking for him, I might never have met you." He squeezed her hand. "I think Patrick would consider that a fair trade." Clara smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "I have something to tell you," she said softly. Thomas murmured, distracted by a distant coyote's call. "I'm with child." Thomas went completely still, then turned to her, his eyes wide. "A baby, you're certain?" Clara nodded, her face glowing in the fading light. Mrs. Jensen confirmed it yesterday. She thinks the baby will come in early November. November, Thomas repeated, a smile spreading across his face. A year after our wedding. He pulled Clara into his arms, holding her as though she were made of glass. I never thought I could be this happy, he whispered against her hair. When Patrick died, I thought my life would always be shadowed by that loss. But you, Clara, you brought light back. Clara wrapped her arms around him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. We found each other in darkness, Thomas, literally in that collapsed mine. Maybe that's why what we have feels so precious. As summer progressed, Clara's pregnancy became more evident, her slender frame changing to accommodate the new life growing within her. Thomas grew increasingly protective, hiring an additional hand to help with the ranch work so he could spend more time near the house. Clara tolerated his hovering with good humor, though she insisted on continuing her normal activities as long as she was able. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, she reminded him one July afternoon as he protested her working in the garden. And frontier women don't have the luxury of sitting idle for 9 months. At least let me do the heavy work, Thomas insisted, taking the water bucket from her hands. Daniel's sister could come help a few days a week if you'd allow it. Clara considered the offer. Abigail Jensen was a capable girl of 14 who had already expressed interest in earning some money of her own. That might be sensible as we get closer to harvest time, she conceded. But for now, I'm perfectly capable of tending my own garden. Thomas looked like he wanted to argue further but wisely held his tongue. Instead, he knelt beside her, carefully pulling weeds from between the rows of corn and beans. Have you thought about names? He asked after a comfortable silence. If it's a boy, I thought perhaps Patrick, Clara said softly, to honor your brother. Thomas's hands stilled. That would mean a great deal to me, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. And if it's a girl, Eliza, Clara answered, after my mother. Thomas nodded approvingly. Patrick or Eliza Sinclair, both fine names. As Clara's November due date approached, preparations for the baby's arrival intensified. Thomas converted the smallest upstairs bedroom into a nursery, crafting a cradle from cedar wood with his own hands. Clara sewed tiny garments in the evenings, her needle flashing in the lamplight as Thomas read aloud from one of the books that filled their shelves. Mrs. Jensen visited regularly, bringing advice along with gifts of baby blankets and preserved fruits for the coming winter. First babies often come late, she counseled Clara, but not always, best to be prepared early. In early October, with the first frost silvering the grass each morning, Thomas rode to the nearest town for additional supplies. The journey would take 3 days, 1 day each way, with a day in town for shopping, the longest he and Clara had been separated since their marriage. I don't like leaving you, he fretted as he prepared to depart. The baby could come early. I'm fine, Clara assured him, adjusting his scarf against the morning chill. Mrs. Jensen will check on me and Daniel will sleep in the bunkhouse while you're gone. Go get what we need and hurry back. Thomas kissed her thoroughly, one hand resting on her rounded belly. 3 days, he promised. No more. But on the evening of the second day, as Clara sat by the fire working on a final baby blanket, a sharp pain gripped her abdomen. She gasped, dropping her needlework. Too soon, she whispered as the pain subsided. Please, not while he's away. Yet within an hour, there was no denying that the baby was coming. Clara sent Daniel to fetch Mrs. Jensen, then began the preparations she had been taught: heating water, gathering clean linens, making the bed ready. By the time Mrs. Jensen arrived, Clara's pains were coming regularly, her face flushed with the effort of remaining calm. First babies take their time, Mrs. Jensen said reassuringly as she helped Clara into a clean nightgown. Your Thomas might well be back before this little one arrives. But the labor progressed more rapidly than expected. By midnight, Clara was struggling through increasingly intense contractions, gripping Mrs. Jensen's hand with surprising strength. I want Thomas, she gasped during a brief respite from the pain. He should be here. Men are rarely present for births, Mrs. Jensen reminded her, bathing her forehead with a cool cloth. And he'll be back tomorrow. Just focus on bringing this child safely into the world. Through the long night, Clara labored bravely, drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. As dawn broke over the eastern hills, casting golden light through the bedroom window, Mrs. Jensen announced that it was time to push. "I can see the head," she encouraged. "Just a little more, Clara. Your baby is almost here." With a final, tremendous effort, Clara brought her child into the world. The baby's angry cry filled the room, bringing tears of joy to Clara's exhausted eyes. "A boy," Mrs. Jensen announced, quickly wrapping the infant in a waiting blanket. A strong, healthy son. Clara held out trembling arms, and the older woman placed the tiny bundle against her chest. Looking down at her son's red, wrinkled face, Clara felt a love so overwhelming it took her breath away. "Patrick," she whispered, touching his cheek with one finger. "Patrick William Sinclair." Hours later, Clara woke from a much-needed sleep to the sound of pounding hooves in the yard. Moments afterward, footsteps thundered up the stairs, and Thomas burst into the bedroom, his face lined with worry and fatigue. "Clara," he breathed, crossing to the bed in 2 strides. "Daniel met me on the road, said the baby was coming." His eyes fell on the small bundle nestled beside her. "Oh my God, meet your son," Clara said, her voice hoarse but joyful. "Patrick William Sinclair." Thomas sank to his knees beside the bed, one shaking hand reaching out to touch the sleeping infant. "He's perfect," he whispered. "And are you all right?" "Tired but well," Clara assured him. "Mrs. Jensen took excellent care of us both." Thomas leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. "I rode all night when I got Daniel's message. Should have been here." "You're here now," Clara said simply, "and we have the rest of our lives together, all 3 of us." Thomas carefully gathered his son into his arms, his expression a mixture of wonder and terror. "Patrick," he said softly, "I promise you'll grow up knowing about your namesake, about your brave mother who pulled a stranger from a collapsed mine. About how lucky your father is to have found you both." As the first year of Patrick's life unfolded, the ranch prospered under Thomas and Clara's careful stewardship. The spring cattle sale brought enough profit to hire a full-time hand, easing Thomas's workload and allowing him more time with his growing family. Clara's garden expanded, and she began raising chickens, adding eggs and poultry to their self-sufficient lifestyle. Patrick grew into a healthy, curious child with Clara's auburn hair and Thomas's gray eyes. He took his first steps on the porch where his parents had sat the evening Clara announced her pregnancy, his delighted laughter echoing across the yard as Thomas clapped encouragement. In the summer of Patrick's 2nd year, Clara discovered she was expecting again. This time, Thomas was present for the birth, a surprisingly quick labor that brought Eliza Rose Sinclair into the world on a snowy December night. With 2 children under 3 years old, Clara's days became a whirlwind of activity, but she approached the challenges with the same determination that had led her into a collapsed mine in search of her brother years before. As the children grew, so did the ranch. Thomas added more cattle, built additional fencing, and constructed a larger barn. Clara established a reputation in the region for her preserves and quilts, which she sold in town during their infrequent visits. Their once isolated homestead gradually became a gathering place for neighboring families, particularly during holiday celebrations. On the 5th anniversary of the day Clara had pulled Thomas from the mine, they stood together on the porch after putting the children to bed, watching a meteor shower streak across the autumn sky. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Clara asked, leaning into his embrace. "If William hadn't been in that mine, if you hadn't followed that boy in, if I hadn't been stubborn enough to search when everyone else had given up." "I think about it often," Thomas admitted. "So many chances for our paths never to have crossed." He tightened his arms around her. "Makes me grateful for every day we have together." Clara turned in his arms, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "When I dug you out of that mine, I had no idea I was unearthing my own future." Thomas smiled, the same smile that had first captivated her in Dr. Merriweather's clinic all those years ago. "And I had no idea that the woman who saved my life would become my reason for living." Above them, stars continued to fall, bright promises streaking across the darkness, while inside the sturdy house built by brothers and made a home by love, two children slept peacefully, their futures as vast and hopeful as the western sky. In the years that followed, the Sinclair Ranch grew into one of the most successful operations in the territory. Thomas's fair business practices and Clara's warm hospitality earned them respect throughout the region. Patrick and Eliza were joined by a third child, Joseph Eric, born when Eliza was 4 years old. As the children grew, Clara often told them the story of how she had found their father buried in a mine, dug him out, and how he had never left her side again, a tale that the children requested repeatedly, especially on stormy nights when the family gathered before the fireplace that had warmed their first evening in the house. When asked why she had entered the dangerous mine when everyone else believed all inside were lost, Clara always gave the same answer. Sometimes you have to look deeper than others are willing to go to find what truly matters. It was a lesson her children took to heart, and one that Clara and Thomas lived by every day of their long and loving life together.